I'm Rabbi Bellows. I'm calling in from Boston, Massachusetts. And I'm here, as you just heard, with Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action, which is mobilizing American Jews to take action on climate change with, we like to say, spiritual audacity and bold political action. Natalie's going to drop in the chat where you can learn more. But this is a great link to join us to take climate action in the new year as we head into this year of possibility and to go deeper with these spiritual adaptation themes, including Jewish wisdom, music, and art for a climate changing world. So this week, we're focusing our practice on a different theme from Dayenu's spiritual adaptation workshops and theory of change each day. We started in gratitude for what we love and want to protect. Yesterday, we took some time for grief for the world as it is. And today and tomorrow, we're going to move to envisioning a just, livable, thriving, add in your own adjective, flourishing, connected future. And by Friday, moving to courageous action. So today and tomorrow, we're going to focus on those new possibilities for the world we want, which I'll say feels particularly poignant for me and important in such a time of uncertainty and tumult. The climate crisis is one of the defining challenges and realities of our lifetimes. I turn sometimes to the work of Rebecca Solnit, an amazing writer, and check out her books if you don't know them. Rebecca Solnit wrote in an article a couple years ago that in order to do what the climate crisis demands of us, we have to find stories of a livable future, stories of popular power, stories that motivate people to do what it takes to make the world we need. So part of our work in this age of climate crisis and the realities of living in this time is to imagine and describe and live into the life-sustaining stories of that world, the stories in which future generations are thriving, and then to do what we can to make those worlds possible. Thankfully, Jewish ancestors have long been using the practice of imagination to courageously envision and then actualize new realities. So we're going to draw on Jewish tradition's profound practices of imagination and storytelling and use it to spark our own hope, creativity, and communal and personal power in service of building this flourishing future. At Dayenu, we have been turning to Midrash for this inspiration. Midrash, on one foot, is a Jewish literary tradition of creative commentary on the Torah. I sometimes hear it defined as fanfic about Torah. It also is one of my favorite Jewish literary traditions. And Midrash, I've been approaching it in my work at Dayenu as a practice, in the same way that meditation is a practice. Midrash as a practice of imagination and storytelling that helps us fill in some of the gaps of what we don't know and creates stories to help us perceive that which is yet unknown about our future and our world, and in the context of Midrash, about moments in the text. So when I was thinking about the expansive tradition of Midrash and where to look for inspiration for this moment that we're living in, I've been coming back to the crossing of the sea, to the Israelites as they are getting ready to cross the sea, leave Egypt and cross the sea, and are actually in the sea, crossing to freedom and to a new way of being. Those are moments that resonate for me in this moment of climate crisis, because we too are in a time of great turning and great transition. So to lead us there, I want to share with you a little midrash from Pesichta de Rav Kahana. Pesichta de Rav Kahana is a 5th or 6th century midrash, one of our oldest editions from Eretz Yisrael. And this is a version that was, as interpreted by Howard Schwartz, who's a contemporary folklorist and author. So the midrash goes that Rabbi Yochanan is sitting with his students in his Beit Midrash, in his house of inquiry. And his students ask him to describe what the walls of the sea looked like when the children of Israel were crossing. They say, Rabbi Yochanan, what was it like to be crossing that sea? And Rabbi Yochanan, generations after that crossing, says, oh, well, of course, it looked like lattice work, like sort of little windows all along the sea, a whole lattice work walls of water. And in that moment, in the window of the Beit Midrash, they hear a voice. There's an old woman there. Her name is Serach Bat Asher. She is the mythic Serach Bat Asher who lived from the time of Yosef and some say is still alive today. And she says, it wasn't like that. I know it wasn't like that because I was there. And they look up, the students look up, and they say, who are you? She says, I'm Serach Bat Asher. I know exactly what the walls of water resembled because I crossed with the people. And those walls, they resembled mirrors, shining, reflective mirrors, in which every human, every animal that was crossing in that moment was reflected. And not only that, you could see every past generation and all those to come crossing with them. Just take a moment and soak that up, that image. Now we are the ones walking through the sea in the midst of a time of great transition to a different way of living toward what we hope is a thriving, beautiful, just, and livable future. So we're going to take a cue from this midrash and step into also a time outside of time, a place where, like Serach Bat Asher, visiting a Beit Midrash of Rabbi Yochanan generations later, where past and future generations can talk to each other, can be in communication. And we're going to think about the year 2200, 176 years from now, to imagine some of the stories that we may need to help us build that future starting now. So in a moment, we're going to move into a guided meditation. And we invite you to just slow down a little bit more. You can let your shoulders drop, your hands rest in your lap. Feel the earth sending its support up your way, supporting our very being. There's a wonderful artist, world builder, designer, and cultural strategist in Brooklyn named Aisha Shillingford. She's from Trinidad and Tobago. And I learned from her a teaching about how to imagine the world we want. Aisha teaches that when we're doing that work of imagination, we need to think of worlds that are inevitable and irresistible. Let me say that again. Inevitable and irresistible. And we want to ask ourselves the questions of what if and why not? Imagination is an embodied practice, not an intellectual exercise. So we get to focus on what a thriving, just, livable future looks like, sounds like, smells like, perhaps even tastes like. Close your eyes if you wish, or just take a deep breath. And imagine that you're able to travel to a land that you love. a place where you already feel connected, where you feel loved, and maybe you've been shaped by that place. Bring to mind a memory or a moment from that land and share a little gratitude for the ancestors of that land, whether you know them or not, for their stewardship that made it possible for you to experience love and joy there. Now imagine arriving at that land in the year 2200, 176 years from now. And as you arrive in this place that you love, imagine that there are still people there, that they are thriving, and that they are living in an equally thriving ecosystem. Take a few minutes to take it in. What do you see, smell, and hear? What does that ecosystem feel and look like? Who is on this land and what are they doing? As you observe this land in the year 2200, what values do you see shaping life there in that community? What shared practices are making it possible for everyone to thrive? What structures or systems exist that make this thriving possible? Consider what we, as future ancestors, did differently today so that our descendants, these future generations in the year 2200, could thrive. How did we ensure that all beings, especially historically marginalized and underfunded communities, had what we need to thrive? What are the kind of leaps that we made and need to make? And as you explore this world, this future, what role did you play that helped us get there? What was your piece, your place as a future ancestor that led to this thriving future? You can imagine for a moment that these beings in this world in 2200, they're sending some gratitude, some thanks to us in our generation, to you and to your friends. Whenever they find land they can grow food in, water that is safe to drink, they know that these seeds of a livable future were planted long ago. And they send their thanks. And as we dwell a little bit longer in this world that we want, bring your attention, bring your focus to one practice, one artifact or evidence from this future world that you want to bring back to the present. One practice, artifact, or evidence from the future world that you want to bring with you back to this present moment. Perhaps a lesson from the future that we could implement now. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to find one thread from that future world to ours today, and hand over hand, invite yourself back to sit in the world of 2024. This challenging and exciting time. This time of great opportunity and great urgency. And just let yourself arrive back, supported by the earth. Open your eyes and bring your attention back to the screen. I'm going to invite folks to actually, in the chat, We're going to do a little, what my colleague calls a harvest, a little gleaning just for 30 seconds or so, little gleaning in the chat. What are some of those practices, artifacts, images that you want to hold on to from that year 2200 that we need today? It could be a word or a phrase. Drop them into the chat. We're all singing together in a fossil-free world, respecting each other with harmony. There are easier modes of transportation. There's less plastic. We're living in groups and circles of care. Aisha Schillingford teaches that we need these artifacts from the future so that we can start building that world now. Keep them coming. And I'll just say, by way of closing, I want to invite everyone on mute or off mute to just join me in a Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be so. Here we go. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be so.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Laura, thank you. Thank you so much for that meditation and teaching and for the sharing at the end, which was really beautiful. And maybe draw some hope. We're going to continue our practice now with the recitation of Kaddish for those among us who are in mourning. And after this, we will blow the shofar because it is Elul, and to wake up our souls and our spirits during this sacred time to the work that we need to do. I invite everyone to put into the chat if there's someone that you are remembering for Kaddish, please put those names in the chat. There we go. Thank you, Irina, and anyone else. And then I invite everyone, please, to rise in body or in spirit, and together, let's unmute and recite the Kaddish. Git Gadol,
לחייכו יברכו לבית קובץ ישראל, הדבר ובזמן קריב יאמרו אמן. והשמיע רבה לברך לעולם ועד. יתברך וישתבח יתפאר העולם יתנשא. יתהדר ויתהלל ויתהלל שמד קודשה ברכו. ואלה מכל ברכתה אשר אתה ושבחתה ונחמתה דניה אמן. יהי שמה רבה מן שמיים וחיים אמן. וכל ישראל אמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומה הוא יעשה שלום. עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל אמרו אמן.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, everyone. I do not believe, Mark didn't leave instructions on this piece, but I don't believe that we have an actual shofar blower amongst us today, unless I'm wrong. If I do, please raise your hand. So we will have a digital but wonderful shofar, and Natalie will assist us with that. So I'll put myself on mute. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So now we end sort of the formal part of our practice. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. May you go in peace, and good health, I pray. We now have questions and answers with Laura for the next 15 minutes, and this is always a wonderfully rich time of the program. So I love what Ricky wrote. So if people have questions, there might have been some, please add them to the chat, and we can ask Laura. Laura, I loved your teaching. I love that image from the Midrash. Is it possible to put that story in, like a link to that story, or how we can find that story? Because it was just beautiful.
Yes. Why don't maybe I can bring that for tomorrow, or
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, you can bring it for
I'm
tomorrow.
happy to kind of,
Yeah.
I have the link on Safaria, but I just have to dig it up.
Okay, don't worry. But
You
it
know, sometimes
reminded
there's some
me.
stories that start telling so much that at this point it's in me, but
Right.
I'll
No, I
sorry.
understand. And you told it beautifully, and it reminded me, this is in a former life, I was an English teacher, but of that wonderful line from Hamlet. I wrote it down, trying to remember it, to hold the mirror up to nature, Shakespeare writes. And that felt sort of like that image of crossing the Red Sea, holding the mirror up to us of who we truly are, not just in this moment, but in all time. It was very powerful.
I am going to share in the chat. This is Howard Schwartz's retelling of it.
Oh, wonderful.
And I'll say the reason why the original Midrash in classic, like ancient Jewish text, in a classic way, goes on to debate, well, how many people was it? Like at the end, they're like, okay, so she saw the people all generations before and it was shining. But like, was that 10,000? Was that 6,000? I think Howard Schwartz takes it into a more expansive, I would say, in some sense, more mystical realm of what does it really mean to be standing in a moment, sitting, whatever, present in a moment where we cannot think of ourselves as only our generation, but need to be thinking of ourselves across, as connected to past and future generations. And that's something that, I don't know whether Howard Schwartz was thinking of this in a climate context at all, but it's something that that in my work at ANU I think about often, because we are so we are so tied to those generations that come next and those that have come before us, and just the ways in which I know I wouldn't be here if some of my ancestors hadn't been able to think of radically different realities for themselves and taken some big risks to make that possible. And I think often about what it means to be, in the words of Aisha Schillingford and others, future ancestors, to be acting as caretakers of those who will come.
Yeah, that I'm going to raise some other people's questions because people are putting them in the chat, but what you've just said really sparked one for me. Ricky asked this. This was more powerful than I anticipated, telling me that we perhaps have lost the art of the kind of hopeful imagination that spurs empowerment and action.
Ricky, I'm really with you. I think, so much, there's a lot of talk in the climate spaces that I'm in these days about what we do with a news cycle that highlights and reinforces the despair and some of the ways in which we are not meeting our goals, which is real. Like, we need to change some major and big systems quickly to avert some of the worst effects of the climate crisis. And it is also true that there are lots of people out there already deep in solutions. And one of the places I've been turning to is actually the world of, it's called cli-fi, climate fiction. There's a series of short stories, kind of a story competition. I pasted this in the chat a little while up. Grist is a magazine, and they have a initiative called Imagine 2200, which draws together writers from, I think, across the world to write some of the stories and imagine, how we get there to the world we want. So that for me has been helpful. Also, the work of Elizabeth Ayana Johnson is, yeah, she's doing incredible work. There are a lot of people out there right now, including Rebecca Solnit, who I quoted from. Yeah, a lot of good work out there right now, particularly highlighting some of the ways in which the climate crisis is also a crisis of imagination. We need to be able to describe and tell the story of where we want to go in order to work towards that, not only the story of where we don't want to go.
Right.
I think we've done a good job of telling the story of where we don't want to go, and it's not that hard to, given the extreme weather and the effects of the climate crisis today, we can imagine that sometimes more easily than
So
the world we want.
that's really, and I see in the chat, like some people, Dee, thank you for sharing what you shared about conjuring scary images where we don't want to go. I conjured an image. I couldn't conjure the future, but I conjured the past. I grew up in Vermont, in a field in Vermont. And, as I think about the image of our ancestors leaving Egypt and doing this radical leave-taking, leaving everything behind, and their very identities behind, really, as slaves to become free. I'm like, what is that? Like, I recycle my coffee pods. Is that good? Like, that's not very radical. Like, where is the Red Sea that I'm crossing? I don't know what that is. I try to get solar panels in my house. I'm told I can't get,
Right. I think, it's, again, I really hear you. I have been engaged in climate and environmental work for about 20 years now, and thankfully stand on the shoulders of many who have been doing this work for decades and decades, probably some in this room. And I have in the last few years sort of shifted from both like holding on one hand an appreciation and a need for what we can and need to do as individuals in our own homes, in our synagogues, in our places of gathering, the ways in which I would say in that sense, there's sort of a practice of integrity there, of aligning our practices with our values, having our lives kind of reflect like the values we want to see in the world. And there's a tremendous need now, given the urgency that we're of this moment, and also the opportunity that we're still in to avert some of the worst of the climate crisis, to scale that action. And the way we do that is, in the words of Bill McKibben, it is to be less of an individual, is to actually join with other people, to find networks and groups of people that are doing that work. I know there are lots of good communities out there that are doing this, including Third Act and many others. Dayenu has over 100 Dayenu circles across the country, which are groups of people taking action at a systems level, usually on a policy front together. And those are some of the ways in which we can really make a difference at scale. And it's not something that we actually can do alone. We need each other. And we need often, I would say, for our own spirits also, to remember that we're not the only one kind of working on this or caring about it or thinking about the world in which our kids or grandkids might grow up into, but to actually be with other people taking action, I believe, is like one of the most hopeful things we can do.
Wow, that's super helpful. And how Jewish is that we can't get there except by holding hands and going together? Okay, there is so much here. Okay, here, please remind me of the 2 questions that you asked after describing a future that is inevitable and irresistible.
I asked, so these particular questions are directly from Aisha Schillingford, who I mentioned, who's in Brooklyn. She says that we need to ask what if and why not when we're thinking about these worlds. And she talks in particular about, I also drew from her the question of like, what leaps do we need to take in our imagining of it? What are the kinds of leaps in what is possible that we need to think about? So not only like if only our train system were more accessible to everyone across the country and ran more shifts, but like, are there ways we are getting around in the future that are truly accessible and good for the earth and good for thriving human communities as well? You know, really, I think about what has changed in the last 176 years. And there's a lot that's possible in the next stretch. So the climate crisis is not going away, but we are still in a time when we really have the power and the ability to shape how it plays out.
Mm.
And that requires both imagination and certainly action.
Tish
Yes.
has left some good comments, picking up on your point. We each need to do whatever small step we can do, and we need to support initiatives and policies that move us forward. It's a balance between what we do individually and what we do collectively. We need to do both. It isn't either or, it's both. And then right after that, Tish makes a plug for Dayenu in a really helpful way. If your shul doesn't have a Dayenu circle, start one. Amen.
Amen. Amen. And I'll just say someday in
Going on my to-do list.
Great. If you go to dayenu.org/action, you'll find the link, more info about Dayenu circles as well. There are many that are based at synagogues, but there are also ones that are based in neighborhoods. There's a Dayenu circle of the Silicon Valley. There's a Dayenu circle in my neighborhood in Boston. That's a connection between a few different communities. So it's essentially a group of people drawing on Jewish wisdom, taking action together, and connected with a national network to be able to do that strategically and effectively. And yeah, happy to share more.
Oh my goodness, it's already 1:15.
Oh, great. Great.
Okay, Laura, I live in Boston, so I will.
Oh.
I might reach out. Okay. Everyone, thank you so much for joining today. Thank you for being here. Always. And Laura, thank you so much for leading us this week in this important series. And
My pleasure. It's great to be with you all. Tomorrow, just to let you all know, tomorrow, Rabbi Batya, Illinois, will be leading the meditation. I'll come join for Q&A. And then I'll be back leading it on Friday.